Good morning to you all. Welcome to the second day of the doctoral seminar on modernization and governance of the European project in a cultural framework with shared values and objectives that we organized with the mobility grants of the 12th European Award-MARCELINO OREJA. And today we will be having David Fernández Rojo from Deusto University, who will be talking about the new claim system for individual complaints for Frontex and Easo. He is particularly interested in national effective implementation of the migration, asylum, and border management. And it will be chaired by Professor Jesus Baigorri, a former professor of the University of Salamanca, professor of interpretation. He retired in 2013, although he leads a very active life since he retired. So in any case, he's been collaborating with the Yuste Foundation for 20 years in many projects, mainly in projects related to languages, because he is an active interpreter. He used to work at the United Nations. He worked there for 10 years as an interpreter, and he's a founding member of the Alpha Keke research group on translation. So introducing a person such as Jesus, that has been my friend and my collaborator for 20 years, is an honor and a pleasure. So thank you, Jesus, again for being there always for us, and you have the floor.
Gracias, Miguel Ángel, por una presentación tan generosa.
Thank you, Miguel Ángel, for such a generous presentation, such a generous introduction, as it always is. I want to use a few minutes, and the speaker has given me his permission, in order to give you sort of footnote on languages. Apparently, the languages are not present, but they are. Umberto Eco, until he died, was a member of the European Academy of Yuste Foundation, as it was called at that time, the European Academy of Yuste. And in one of his very famous quotes, he said, and I quote, "The language of Europe is translation," end of quote, which is true. We couldn't conceive Europe without the existence of languages. We couldn't think of it without the existence of mediators that, of course, put the laws drafted in one language into other languages so that the citizens can understand them, because the language regime of the European Union is a universal regime, unlike the United Nations, meaning that all the national languages are working languages and official languages. But it is true that there is a language that is more equal than the others in the European Union. It is, of course, English. Possibly at the time of the Delors Commission, of which Marcelino Oreja was a member, French was more present than English. And in former times, of course, French was the language of diplomacy, international relations, not English. In reality, there is a chapter in the Words of the World book by Abraham de Swam, another member of the Yuste Foundation Academy, that is entitled "The More Languages, the More English." I don't know if it's right like that, but well, anyway, you understand that the more languages, the more English. For example, if you are from Malta and you're from Finland, of course, well, or most likely you will be speaking English instead of trying Finnish or Maltese. So we live in translation. And possibly, if Brexit becomes a reality, Well, we are looking forward to what Polly is going to say to us tomorrow. If Brexit becomes a reality, that will be the legacy left by the United Kingdom when it leaves. English will still be the most used language in the European Union, even if it continues to be the official language in Ireland and Maltese. It is true, too, that if English is as extensive and as dominant as it is now, it's not just because of the United Kingdom, but because the US. So when I talk about this idea, this concept of more languages, more English, I am just describing a geopolitics of languages. This is what I was thinking of yesterday when I was talking with Matteo La Ruffa, and he said that while lecturing in Rome, he uses English instead of Italian because concepts are coined in English. In Italy, in the country where the first university, Bologna, was established in 1150. So in Rome, when in Rome, he speaks English because otherwise the concepts are not fully understood, which really strikes me. It is a sort of colonialism of other languages or by other languages with regards to the language of where for example, where the news are produced. Maybe this is another way of recognizing that we are accepting what Boaventura de Sousa Santos, quoted yesterday by Ruth Ferrero as Bonaventura de Sousa, which is not right. He is called Boaventura Santos, just like Durão Barroso is called Barroso, and Jorge Branco de Sampaio is Jorge Sampaio, because you know that in Portuguese, the mother's surname, the mother's family name, is used before the father's family name. Maybe you didn't know it, and Portugal is one of our neighboring countries. We have another great example in the case of the famous great Spanish painter Diego da Silva Velázquez. Diego Velázquez, because, well, his mother was Portuguese. So maybe we are recognizing, and I was just saying this because I wanted to say that maybe we are recognizing that we are accepting the epistemicide, which is a concept coined by Boaventura dos Santos, who coined that term, epistemicide. Yesterday, while I was going back to the hotel in the bus, I was sitting with Professor Jürgen Elbert. I was looking at the landscape from Yuste to Quacos, and I asked him whether the landscape resembled certain regions of Germany. And he said, yes, looks like the area where we used to live before we moved. But the forest there is much thicker. Behind that innocent reflection, as innocent as my own casual question, lies a theory of translation. Ortega and Gasset said that when a German says Wald, he doesn't mean the same as a Spaniard when he says Bosque, forest. And Walter Benjamin said the same with French. When a Frenchman thinks of the word pain, in French, he doesn't think the same object when a German says pot. Well, you imagine a Frenchman imagines or thinks of a baguette instead of a piece of bread by a German, which is, again, a theory of translation. And I have to quote again Umberto Eco, who has a book on, well, dire quasi la stessa cosa. Quasi, so almost, saying almost the same thing. That is what translation does. it says almost the same thing. So this is an element that I find interesting, and I wanted to highlight it because it's really related to the questions that we're going to discuss here today. And I'm going to really refer to the topic that will be introduced, that will be presented by David. We have talked about refugees and subsidiarity and the passing on rules from top to bottom and the transposition of the European directives to the national legislation. The first shock a refugee may have is language and culture, because the cosmovision of a refugee